What happens when a mother is left alone in a hospital bed, her children nowhere to be found? The decision she makes afterward will change their family forever. The sharp antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to the air as Helen Warner lay motionless in the narrow bed, sunlight slicing across the pale green walls. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was her only companion. She blinked at the ceiling, counting the slow seconds, the thin pulse of pain still lingering from the surgery. A nurse's face, young, kind, but already tired, floated into view every hour or so to check vitals, murmur a gentle, "You're doing well, Mrs. Warner," and disappear. Helen's phone, plugged into the charger beside her, stayed maddeningly silent. She had texted her children, Jack in Dallas, always too busy with his law firm, and Lindsay, who lived just a 40-minute drive away. The surgery date wasn't a surprise. She'd sent reminders, even added little heart emojis for Lindsay, a gentle plea in digital ink. The only reply she'd received was a clipped, "Hope it goes okay, Mom," from Jack. Lindsay had left her message on read. As the day wore on, Helen tried to distract herself. She watched orderlies shuffle by, eavesdropped on the nurses joking at the station, and listened to the television in the next room blaring afternoon talk shows. She stared at the stack of get-well cards on her nightstand, most from her bridge club friends and her neighbor, Mrs. Vogel, who'd watered Helen's plants while she was away. No cards from Jack or Lindsay. Lunch arrived in a plastic tray, gelatin, gray chicken, limp green beans. She picked at the food, appetite gone. The nurse returned with fresh ice water, asking, "Any family coming by today, Mrs. Warner?" Helen shook her head, voice catching as she said, "Maybe later." The day blurred. Helen drifted in and out of sleep, startled awake by distant alarms and intercom calls. She replayed memories of Jack's first piano recital, Lindsay's spelling bee triumph, birthday parties with homemade cakes and little hands clutching gifts. She had been the center of their world once, a fixture at every milestone. Now, as the hours crawled by, that world seemed impossibly far away. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Vogel called. "How are you, dear? I can bring flowers tomorrow, or your crossword books. Do you need anything?" Helen felt a surge of gratitude and shame. Her neighbor remembered, but her own children did not. By dusk, Helen had watched the golden light fade from the window and felt her phone vibrate. Her heart leapt. Jack at last? No. Just a pharmacy reminder for her next medication pickup. She scrolled through her messages, rereading Jack's last Happy Mother's Day text, the digital equivalent of a handshake. The nurse returned at 7, bringing dinner and a gentle smile. "You're doing better than most," she said. Helen managed a weak grin. After the nurse left, Helen studied her own wrinkled hands, hands that had braided hair, sewn Halloween costumes, signed school forms, written tuition checks, and held her husband's as he slipped away. She pulled the blanket up and stared at the door, willing it to open, hoping for footsteps, laughter, even an awkward hello from Lindsay or Jack. Instead, the corridor was silent, save for distant wheels on linoleum. As night deepened, Helen texted Lindsay one more time. "I'd love to see you, if you have a moment. The nurses say visiting hours go until 9. No reply. Her phone screen dimmed, the hospital's lights flickered, and outside, car headlights passed like silent ghosts. Helen listened to the machines, the air thick with absence. She pressed the call button once, just to feel someone near, then let herself sink into uneasy sleep, alone, with only her memories and the sound of her own heartbeat echoing against the silence. The next morning, Helen awoke to the low hum of the hospital's routine, nurses bustling, carts clattering, morning announcements drifting through the intercom. Her arm ached where the 4 was taped. She pressed the remote to raise her bed. The mechanical were oddly comforting in the quiet. A different nurse came in, older, brisk, efficient. "Let's check your blood pressure, Mrs. Warner." Helen tried to chat, desperate for conversation, but the nurse, polite but rushed, just smiled and promised to return with a breakfast tray. Helen's breakfast, scrambled eggs that tasted of nothing, dry toast, orange juice, reminded her of lonely childhood mornings after her mother died. She longed for voices in the room, for laughter, for someone to share the bland meal. Her mind drifted to the past, Jack's first broken bone, Lindsay's ballet recital. In every emergency, Helen had been there, the reliable force who soothed, organized, and never faltered. She checked her phone again. No new messages. The silence from Jack and Lindsay had taken on a new metallic edge, something between sadness and anger. Helen wondered if they'd even told their friends or colleagues that their mother was in the hospital. Did they feel guilt, or had the machinery of their busy lives simply left no room for her? At 10, the chaplain stopped by. He knocked softly and entered with gentle authority, a thin Bible in hand. "May I sit with you a while?" he asked. Grateful for the company, Helen agreed. They spoke of nothing important: weather, the view from the window, Helen's favorite books. She didn't mention her children. The chaplain prayed, squeezed her hand, and left her with a warm sense of comfort that faded as soon as the door closed. Time oozed forward. Mrs. Vogel arrived, brightening the room with lilacs from her garden and a small crossword book. "You're looking better, Helen. Are your kids coming today?" Helen forced a smile, shook her head, and changed the subject to gardening. Mrs. Vogel stayed for half an hour, filling the room with her energy, asking about Helen's recovery, promising to check on the house again. When Mrs. Vogel left, the quiet roared back in. Helen stared at the clock. The hours between noon and dinner crawled. Nurses came and went, the physical therapist stopped by to walk her down the hallway, and the respiratory technician adjusted her oxygen. Each encounter was professional, kind, but brief. Every time the door opened, Helen's heart leapt, hoping for Jack or Lindsay. It was always someone else. At 4, Helen finally gave in and called Jack. Straight to voicemail. She left a soft message: "I'd love to hear your voice, honey. Just a minute, if you can spare it." No response. Lindsay's social media updated mid-afternoon, photos from brunch with friends, self-care Sunday hashtags, a smiling selfie. Helen stared at the post, reading and rereading it. She typed a comment, deleted it, then simply pressed the like button and closed the app. Dinner arrived: meatloaf, instant potatoes, soggy peas. She picked at the food and watched a sitcom, laughing at the canned jokes more out of longing than amusement. The night shift nurse brought Helen her medication, fluffed her pillow, and asked, "No family today?" Helen just shook her head, voice too brittle for an answer. She gazed at her phone, willing it to light up, to prove she still mattered. Outside, the city glowed in 1,000 windows. In this room, only one woman waited, for love, for recognition, for proof that all her years of mothering hadn't been quietly erased. As the hallway grew silent, Helen pressed her palm to her chest and whispered, "I'm still here." The words hung in the air, invisible to everyone but herself. Helen's third day in the hospital began with a jolt. At dawn, she woke to the muffled sound of a code blue on another floor, the distant rush of feet down the hall. The hospital never really slept. She lay still, listening to her heart pound against her ribs, suddenly aware of her own vulnerability, the slow ebb of strength since the surgery. The morning nurse brought a warm smile and a gentle touch. "You're looking stronger, Mrs. Warner." Helen managed a small laugh. "I might be the only one who notices." The nurse's eyes lingered with sympathy, but she quickly returned to her rounds. After the nurse left, Helen stared at the empty visitor's chair beside her bed. It seemed to taunt her, an unspoken question: would anyone fill this space today? She sent Jack a text: "Still here at St. Mary's. Would love a visit, but I understand if you're busy. Love, Mom." She typed another to Lindsay: "Recovery's slow. I could use some company, if you can swing by." No replies. The screen glowed, then faded, a cruel mirror of her hope. The hospital volunteers stopped by with a cart of paperbacks and magazines. Helen chose a mystery novel, smiling politely, but found she couldn't concentrate. Her mind wandered, replaying old memories, carrying Jack on her hip at the grocery store, sitting through Lindsay's endless school band concerts, patching up scraped knees and broken hearts. 4 years, she'd been their anchor. Where were they now? Mrs. Vogel called again, her voice brisk. "Helen, do you need anything from the house? The mail's piling up, and the tomatoes are looking good." Helen thanked her, declining more errands, grateful for the simple kindness. The day passed in a rhythm of routine and disappointment. Lunch came and went. A social worker stopped by, asking if Helen had anyone to help at home after discharge. Helen hesitated, not wanting to admit her children's absence. "My neighbor will check in," she answered, voice tight. The physical therapist returned, coaxing Helen down the hall, steadying her as she shuffled past rooms filled with flowers, balloons, laughter, family. Each room seemed to hum with energy she lacked. Helen's steps slowed as she passed a boy reading to his grandmother, a father cradling a newborn, a woman surrounded by her grown sons. A small ache grew in Helen's chest, not just from the incision, but from the loneliness that pressed in like a bruise. Back in her room, the volunteer chaplain visited again. This time, Helen spoke freely, voicing her fear that she had somehow failed as a mother, that her children's absence meant she was easy to forget. The chaplain listened, offered comfort, and reminded her, sometimes, life's busyness and selfishness aren't a reflection of your love, but of their own blindness. Helen nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Late afternoon brought rain. The hospital window fogged, city lights blurred into streaks. Helen watched as visitors came and went, arms full of flowers and care packages. She checked her phone again. Nothing. Dinner was silent. She pushed the tray away untouched. Appetite vanished. The nurse noticed, offered crackers, but Helen just shook her head. As the clock neared 9, visiting hours ticked away. The chair by her bed remained empty, the air heavy with the words left unsaid, the visits never made. Helen drifted to sleep with the light on, holding the old mystery novel, the pages unread. She dreamed of her children as small and laughing, arms reaching for her, and woke to darkness and the low, steady beep of the machines. The next morning, Helen awoke to the sharp click of heels in the hallway and the soft murmur of shift change. She lay quietly, listening, waiting for the familiar squeak of the door, some small hope that today might be different. She closed her eyes, picturing Jack or Lindsay striding in, bringing flowers, laughter, even awkward conversation. But when she opened them, only the nurse appeared, efficient and polite, offering a thermometer and a cheerful, "Let's see how you're doing today, Mrs. Warner." The sun rose higher, painting the linoleum floor with pale gold. Helen's breakfast tray arrived, pale oatmeal, underripe banana, weak coffee. She poked at the food, appetite absent, and set the tray aside. Her phone sat on the table, its silence heavier by the hour. She reread yesterday's messages, searching for a reply, a blue bubble, any sign that her children still thought of her. She texted Lindsay again. "Just checking in. Miss you. Let me know if you can stop by, even for a few minutes." She started to call Jack, but hesitated, remembering the clipped tone of his last voicemail. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts, pausing at names from her past, friends long lost to distance, relatives who'd moved away. She wondered when her circle had grown so small, her world shrinking as the children grew and scattered. A volunteer brought in a tray of flowers, left by families with too many bouquets. "Would you like one?" Helen chose a cheerful arrangement of daisies and roses, arranging them on her tray table, letting their scent cut through the antiseptic air. At 10, the physical therapist arrived for another walk. This time, Helen moved more slowly, her muscles stiff from both surgery and disuse. The hallway was busy. An older man argued gently with his daughter about taking his medicine. A small girl handed her grandmother a homemade card. A cluster of teenagers crowded into a room, joking and snapping photos. Helen longed for such noise, the happy chaos of family that had once filled her life. Back in her room, Mrs. Vogel called. "Helen, I saw Lindsay's car at the grocery store this morning. Maybe she's planning a visit." Helen clung to the hope, her heart leaping. "Maybe," she answered, voice thin with forced optimism. Time dragged. The chaplain stopped by again, bringing an old hymnal and offering to sing. Helen requested, "Abide with me." The melody filled the room with comfort, bittersweet and familiar, and for a few moments she let herself rest in its peace. At noon, Helen stared at her phone. No new calls. She refreshed her inbox. Nothing from Jack, nothing from Lindsay. Her fingers hovered over their numbers, but she put the phone down, unwilling to beg for attention she'd once received without asking. The afternoon passed in a haze of television reruns, the endless shuffle of nurses, the steady beep of machines. A social worker arrived, gentle but professional, asking about Helen's support network at home. Helen lied, "My children will help." The words tasted sour, but pride refused to let her admit the truth. Dinner came and went. Still, the chair by her bed remained empty. At dusk, the volunteer delivered mail, mostly flyers, a bill from the pharmacy, and a cheerful note from Mrs. Vogel, written in looping cursive, "You are not forgotten." Helen read it twice, clutching the paper like a lifeline. The city outside glittered with distant life. In her room, The silence pressed in. She lay back, tears stinging, vowing not to reach out again, not tonight. She let herself drift off to sleep, the flowers beside her bed the only witness to a mother's longing. On Friday, Helen woke before sunrise, the hospital still and hushed. A nurse checked her vitals and, seeing Helen awake, lingered a moment. "You've had a tough week, Mrs. Warner. Anything I can do?" Helen smiled, grateful for the question. "Just keep me company for a minute," she said, and the nurse nodded, sitting quietly as the sun edged the sky with pink. After the nurse left, Helen sat up and scrolled through her phone. Still no messages from Jack or Lindsay. A familiar ache throbbed beneath her ribs, a slow, dull pain that no medication touched. She set the phone aside and resolved not to check it again for the morning. Breakfast was oatmeal again, but this time Helen forced herself to eat, telling herself that healing, at least, was something she could do on her own. She read a chapter of her novel, then dressed in the new robe Mrs. Vogel had brought, bright blue with cheerful daisies. The fabric was soft, a small comfort. By mid-morning, the chaplain returned, this time bringing a deck of cards. "You play gin rummy, Mrs. Warner?" Helen grinned. She hadn't played since Ed passed. They played 3 hands, laughing quietly. The chaplain asked about Ed, about Helen's childhood, about her favorite memories with her children. Helen spoke openly, sometimes smiling, sometimes fighting back tears. When the chaplain left, Helen felt lighter, as though some part of the loneliness had been named, if not soothed. A volunteer from the auxiliary knocked and wheeled in a cart of magazines and crossword puzzles. "Need anything, dear?" she asked, adjusting the flowers on Helen's nightstand. "No, thank you. Just your smile is enough," Helen replied. The woman winked and promised to come by tomorrow with a new puzzle book. Lunchtime brought the physical therapist. Helen was stronger today, walking farther down the hall, stopping to chat with another patient, Mrs. Rhodes, who'd just had a hip replaced. They talked about their gardens, exchanged recipes, and promised to sit together for lunch the next day. The afternoon unfolded in small, gentle kindnesses. Mrs. Vogel called from the pharmacy. "Do you want your favorite tea? I'm out running errands anyway." Helen accepted, grateful for the offer. Later, a group of nurses came by with coffee and a slice of lemon cake for Helen. "It's not homemade, but it's the best the cafeteria offers," one joked. They lingered, talking about movies, families, the endless work of caring for others. Helen listened, contributed stories of her own, laughed at a nurse's impression of the hospital's grumpy administrator. For a brief window of time, the room felt almost festive, alive with warmth and shared experience. When the nurses finally left, Helen realized she didn't feel quite so invisible anymore. By evening, Helen's pain returned, sharper this time. The nurse brought stronger medication and sat for a moment, holding Helen's hand. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. Alone again, Helen gazed out the window at the city, lights flickering on in apartments and houses. Somewhere, her children lived their busy lives, unknowing or uncaring about the woman who'd once shaped their world. Helen grieved that loss, but she also felt a strange new pride, a sense that her kindness, her patience, her quiet endurance had drawn a different kind of family to her bedside. As night deepened, Helen sipped her tea, the taste of lemon lingering, and made a quiet promise to herself. She would not chase those who could not see her, not anymore. Saturday dawned gray and chilly, clouds rolling past the hospital windows. Helen woke slowly, blinking against the thin morning light, her body aching in too many places to count. She pressed the call button, asking the nurse for extra blankets. The young nurse, Megan, brought 2, then surprised Helen by sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's quiet this morning," Megan said. "Mind if I keep you company?" Helen shook her head, grateful. They talked about Megan's plans for nursing school, her hope to work in pediatrics, her own grandmother who'd recently passed. Helen listened, offered encouragement, shared stories of her own mother, how she'd kept the family together after Helen's father died young. After Megan left, Helen found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations from her life. She remembered reading to Jack by flashlight on stormy nights, sewing Lindsay's Halloween costumes, late-night phone calls about college drama or work deadlines. She'd always answered, always been present, always put herself last. And now, in this bright, sterile room, she wondered when that became her only role. A volunteer dropped by with the day's newspaper and a small bouquet of wildflowers. Helen thanked her, arranging the flowers beside Mrs. Vogel's lilies, their scent pushing back the hospital's medicinal air. Later, Mrs. Rhodes, the hip replacement patient from down the hall, shuffled in for a visit. They shared stories about their gardens, reminisced about summers spent canning fruit, and laughed about hospital food. Mrs. Rhodes admitted her children hadn't called either. "Maybe it's our generation," she mused. "We taught them to be independent, and now they've forgotten we still need them sometimes." Helen nodded, feeling the comfort of shared experience. Lunchtime brought another new face, a social worker named Carla, who asked gently about Helen's plans for discharge. "Will your family be able to help?" Helen hesitated. "My neighbor, Mrs. Vogel, has been a godsend. But I can manage." Carla pressed. "And your children?" Helen's voice hardened. "I don't want to trouble them." Carla nodded, making notes. "Sometimes, it's okay to ask for help, Mrs. Warner. Sometimes it's okay to expect it." After Carla left, Helen sat with her thoughts. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through old photos of Jack and Lindsay as toddlers, grinning at the beach, blowing out birthday candles, holding her hand in grainy snapshots from decades ago. She felt pride, and also a sharp sadness. In the afternoon, Mrs. Vogel arrived with Helen's favorite tea, a new book, and a warm scarf. "I wish your kids were here," she said gently. "But you're not alone, Helen." They drank tea and talked for an hour, laughter bubbling between sips, the hospital room transformed by kindness and companionship. After Mrs. Vogel left, Helen grew restless. She stared at her hospital chart, her insurance forms, the paperwork about power of attorney and living wills. The idea began to form, slow, steady, and startling in its clarity. By evening, Helen requested her financial documents from home. "I'd like to review some things while I'm here," she told the nurse, her tone calm but decisive. She made a list of questions for her attorney, wrote notes in careful script, and felt, for the first time in weeks, the old confidence rising in her chest. As night closed in, Helen sat by the window, hands folded, eyes tracing the city skyline. She whispered a promise to herself. No more waiting for love from those who have chosen absence. I can decide what comes next. Sunday morning dawned with a soft, golden light, the city quiet beneath a thin veil of mist. Helen woke early, determined. After breakfast, coffee, half a roll, the last of the wildflower honey, she set to work. With her robe wrapped tightly around her, she opened the folder of documents Mrs. Vogel had fetched from her house. Inside were her will, bank statements, and handwritten letters to her attorney, all carefully organized. Helen read through the will with a critical eye, tracing the lines that split her modest estate evenly between Jack and Lindsay. She remembered drafting the first version with Ed after Lindsay's birth, the two of them optimistic and certain that, whatever happened, their children would always care for each other, and for them. The irony stung. Her attorney, Mr. Clarkson, called mid-morning. "Helen, I've got the documents you asked for. Is everything all right?" Helen explained, her voice steady. "I'd like to make some changes. I'm revisiting my plans." Mr. Clarkson listened, took notes, and reassured her, "Whatever you decide, I'll help you make it happen." After the call, Helen stared out the window, watching a pair of sparrows argue over a crumb on the windowsill. She felt a mix of sadness, anger, and resolve. If her children could ignore her pain and her hospital bed, she could reclaim the power to decide who truly deserved her legacy. As the day unfolded, the hospital staff became her surrogate family. The chaplain stopped in for cards and conversation. Mrs. Rhodes joined her for lunch, bringing a crossword puzzle and gossip from the nursing station. A nurse named Carla braided Helen's hair, joking, "You're the queen of this wing." The warmth of these simple gestures filled the hollows left by Jack and Lindsay's absence. Helen spent part of the afternoon on her phone, researching local charities, animal shelters, a scholarship fund at her old college, the hospital's volunteer auxiliary. She made a list, writing careful notes for each, considering what her money could mean for someone who'd never let her feel invisible. In the late afternoon, Jack finally called. His voice was rushed, distant. "Hey Mom, how are you? Work's been nuts. Sorry I haven't been by. How long are you staying in?" Helen replied gently, "I'm feeling better. They're hoping to send me home soon." Jack offered a vague promise to visit next week, then signed off quickly. Helen hung up, her resolve crystallizing. Lindsay's silence was even more telling. Her daughter had seen the missed calls, but hadn't replied. After dinner, Mrs. Vogel arrived with a batch of cookies and the local paper. They played cards, shared stories about Ed, and laughed about hospital food disasters. "You know," Mrs. Vogel mused, "sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly shows up." As dusk deepened, Helen began drafting a letter to her attorney, specifying her new wishes. She set aside funds for Mrs. Vogel, a donation for the hospital, and scholarships for students in need. The rest, she noted, would be decided after her next talk with Jack and Lindsay, if they chose to come. Before sleep, Helen stood by the window, city lights flickering. She whispered, "This is my life. I get to draw the lines." With a calm she hadn't known in years, Helen slipped into bed, holding her decisions close, heart quiet and unburdened for the first time since she'd arrived. Monday brought Helen's last morning in the hospital. The nurses helped her dress in real clothes, soft gray pants, her favorite blue sweater, the scarf Mrs. Vogel had gifted her. Helen packed her things in a small tote, tucking the new will and her notes for Mr. Clarkson in a sturdy envelope. She gazed around the room for a moment, bidding farewell to the beeping monitors, the chipped white vase of fading daisies, the empty visitor's chair. Discharge was a slow, methodical process. Paperwork, instructions, medication. The social worker checked on her one final time. "Are you sure you'll be all right at home, Mrs. Warner?" Helen nodded. "I have what I need," she answered, meaning every word. Mrs. Vogel arrived in her battered old sedan to collect Helen. The drive home wound through quiet neighborhoods, spring in full bloom. Helen watched the city roll by, feeling both tired and strangely renewed. Mrs. Vogel carried Helen's bag inside, fussing over the thermostat and insisting on making tea. "You call me if you need anything, day or night," she said, giving Helen's hand a firm squeeze. Settling into her living room, Helen felt the silence. No balloons, no welcome home sign, no children on the doorstep. She didn't cry. Instead, she placed her hospital bracelet in the kitchen drawer, brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea, and watched the sunlight play across the family photos lining her mantel. Ed's face smiled out from every corner. Jack and Lindsay, as children, laughed forever on the beach, in the backyard, at Christmas dinner. Helen traced their faces, remembering her promise not to beg for love again. The phone rang that afternoon. It was Jack. "Mom, you home?" "Sorry, I've just been." Helen cut in gently. "Yes, I'm home. Recovery's going well. The hospital staff took wonderful care of me." Jack paused. "I'm glad. Let me know if you need anything." "I will," Helen replied, her tone soft but final. A text arrived from Lindsay. "Glad you're out. Sorry I didn't make it by. Work's been a mess. Love you." Helen stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Thank you. Take care of yourself." That evening, Helen drafted a new letter to Mr. Clarkson, confirming the changes to her will. She set aside bequests for Mrs. Vogel, the hospital, the library, and the scholarship fund. For Jack and Lindsay, she left what felt fair, not the bulk, not nothing, but enough to say, "I remember you," and no more. The letter was clear, direct, and written without anger. Dinner was quiet but peaceful. Tea, toast, and the satisfaction of having chosen her path. As dusk fell, Mrs. Vogel stopped by again, bringing a casserole and stories from the neighborhood. They ate together, the small kitchen alive with warmth. Before bed, Helen sat by her window, city lights flickering. She wrote in her journal, "I was not seen in my hour of need, but I see myself now. I owe no more than I have given." She slept deeply, unburdened by longing or regret. In the morning, sunlight streamed into her room, touching her gently awake. For the first time in years, Helen did not reach for her phone. She looked out at the garden, at the open world ahead, and whispered a thank you, to herself, to Ed, to the unlikely family that had stood by her when others would not. Her story, for once, belonged to her.